Ford came out with the Taurus SHO or SHO in 1989, a very respected four-door sedan at the time. To this day, these first gens are some of my favorite sports sedans offered by Ford. I do feel like the last generation was overlooked because of the competition, but anyway, before the SHO, there was the LTD LX. And after reading countless articles and comments from owners, I almost think that these were cooler for the time. If you've never heard of these, or I just jogged your memory, or you know a lot about them, there's more to this car than meets the eye, and that is why I wanted to dedicate an entire video to it. The Ford LTD LX looks like every other boxy sedan from the 80s, and if you remember playing GTA Vice City, then you might remember these as the cop cars. I'm here to tell you that these LTDs brought something different to the table. I appreciate you all tuning in. Thank you for those returning viewers for continuing to watch my videos, and if you are new here, welcome to my channel. I have chapters or timestamps linked in the description to help you navigate the video. I'm not here to waste your time, so feel free to skip over if you want. With all that said, here is an entire video devoted to the four-door Mustang. The Ford LTD dates back to the 60s as this popular full-size car. I say car because there were a few different variations of it. The second gen, introduced in '69, continues what the first gen started. Then for the third generation, the LTD was downsized right in '79, along with pretty much everything else, but now they were on the all-new Panther platform, this body-on-frame beast of a chassis. Ford ended up making some changes in 1983. Basically, there was now the LTD Crown Victoria and the all-new mid-size LTD. What better platform than the Fox body and chassis to take on this new mid-size sedan? I say new, but realistically this was a refresh for the Granada. Now, some of my details might be slightly off, to be completely transparent, but I believe this is the most basic storyline of what happened. So what did this mid-size LTD offer to the public? Well, it was a pretty typical sedan for the time. Dodge had their 600 and K cars, while GM had the Celebrity and 6000. Just like the Granada, there was a wagon version, and over the course of its production run, it sold really well. Now, I said earlier that these utilized the Fox chassis just like how the Granada did, and one could say there was some styling from the Fairmont incorporated as well. The main takeaway point from all of this was the new LTD was on the Fox platform. This will play a crucial role in what I'm about to tell you. Bob Bondurant was this famous race car driver back in the day. He ended up opening a racing school to help enthusiasts get better, well, at racing in the late 60s. Fast forward to the 80s and students were escorted around the track in Mustangs. Over time, this got real old for both the instructors and students. There just wasn't enough room. Also, if there was more room, that meant more money. As I said earlier, the new LTD was on the Fox platform. Well, these had the same underpinnings as the Mustang. So Bondurant dropped a carbureted Mustang 5.0 and 5-speed manual into an '84 LTD, along with various Mustang suspension components and safety equipment. I believe less than 10 were made for the track. Donald Peterson, the president of Ford at the time, was very impressed with Bondurant's LTD. So impressed that Ford ended up producing a similar version as the LTD LX. And finally, with the context out of the way, I can finally begin talking about the four-door Mustang.
Take Ford LTD, a family car that offers comfort. Add Bob Bondurant, a man who demands capability.
This particular LTD that we're driving really handles pretty nicely. Very responsive, remarkably agile.
The goal for the LX was to compete with those European sports sedans that were gaining popularity in the early to mid 80s. From Ford's perspective, to see consumers paying more for BMWs, Mercedes, Audis, and whatnot is why they went the Euro route. There was this European/domestic craze during the 80s from the big three. The people over at GM literally had a trim for the Celebrity called the Eurosport. At Chrysler, there was the Dodge 600 ES that came with Chrysler's 2.2 turbo, intended to compete with the convertibles. So it makes sense why they focused their marketing tactics towards being a European sedan versus being, I guess you could say, a street racer. Apart from a very select few, sports sedans weren't popular from domestic automakers. It was just starting to be a thing. So to see a regular LTD with a Mustang 5.0 was bizarre to say the least. I mentioned earlier that Bob Bondurant slapped the carbureted 5-liter into the LTD. Unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say that, but they ended up not putting in the 4-valve carbureted version. Instead, the LXs had electronic fuel injection. So what does this all mean? Basically, without going into depth about the differences in their induction systems, power output was not as high. The Ford LTD LX made 165 horsepower and 245 pound-feet of torque. The Mustang, on the other hand, made 210 horsepower and 270 pound-feet of torque. While we continue with the negatives, I should mention that the Mustangs that came with electronic fuel injection, well, those made 180 horsepower and the same amount of torque. The reason for that 15 horsepower drop is due to the LX's single exhaust system. The only transmission offered in these was the 4-speed automatic overdrive from the Mustang, so there was no 5-speed manual. While this does come off as underwhelming from a modern perspective, remember the context of the situation. This was before the Taurus SHO and during a time when fuel economy was the demand and priority from consumers. It makes sense why Ford didn't slap in the more powerful engine. If we look at GM, nothing could beat the Corvette. For a modern perspective, the Firebird WS6 was slightly detuned from the factory, as was the Trailblazer SS, even though they had pretty much the same engine. For a regular sedan to have similar power numbers to the Mustang wouldn't have been the best marketing tactic. But still, these had the Mustang 5.0 in them, 0 to 60 right under 9 seconds. The BMW 530i at the time had a 0 to 60 of 8.3 seconds. While better off the line, they probably cost double to the LTD. Also, when compared to the Mustang, they had more room for families, the missus would approve, insurance was cheaper, and cops didn't notice them as much. When it comes to handling, traditionally the LTD would drive like this floaty boat, as many American cars did, but these were different. Obviously, they were on a much smaller platform than the prior generations. The main thing though was these received a few upgrades over regular LTDs. Stiffer suspension, gas-filled shocks, thicker stabilizer bars, better tires, and Ford's track lock system, or limited slip. With all of these enhancements, body roll was minimal and handling was pretty decent for its size. Even though these cars were downsized, they weren't tiny by any means. They're longer than a modern Fusion and Malibu. If we look at Ford's LTD sales brochure for 1985, we can see the different trims offered. The regular 4-door sedan, followed by the LTD Brougham, which is interesting on its own, the LTD LX, a touring sedan with the emphasis on performance, and lastly the wagon. Looking at the 1984 LTD sales brochure, you would quickly notice that there's no LX trim offered. That's because these were introduced late for 1984 and actually were discontinued in 1985. As for the exterior, these received special charcoal bumper guards, red accents, a color-keyed grille, chrome exhaust tip, and the ad simply says rub strips and moldings, whatever that entails. These LTDs also had rubber lug covers. The interior featured bucket seats, door inserts, carpet covers, and my favorite, lumbar inflators. It's as if you're checking the car's blood pressure. Mercury being the corporate twin, of course they had their own version as the Marquis LTS, which was nicknamed the Baby Marauder. Only 134 of these sold and were limited to the Canadian market. There is only one forum out there that briefly addresses this car, and the website looks like it was made in the early 2000s. A few questions raced through my head with this alternative. If anyone knows some history on these, I would love to read your comments. Very early in the video, I mentioned the Fairmont, which was another car on the Fox platform. With its introduction, they were offered with a police package, and since those were discontinued along with the Granada, the LTD was the best option for a mid-sized police car from Ford. I bring this up because the majority of these LTDs with the 5.0 were fleet vehicles. Only around 5,000 LTD LXs were sold from 1984 until 1985, however more than 10,000 fleet LTDs sold during those same years. For reference, over 350,000 Mustangs sold in 84 and 85. Saying that these are rare is an understatement. Some will pop up for sale here and there, but with such limited numbers and with the number of years that have gone by, there's probably less than half still on the road and even a smaller percentage for sale. There weren't that many noticeable differences between the cop LTDs and the civilian ones. From the outside, I believe they may have come with different wheels, and apart from the add-ons I mentioned earlier, they were pretty identical. Mechanically, they too were the same apart from the cop cars featuring a heavy-duty oil cooler and alternator. The inside is where things start to change. Obviously there were no bucket seats, and the calibration was raised to 140 compared to 85, no center console, and cop cars had a column shifter as opposed to a floor shifter. LXs also featured a tachometer, which was pretty cool to have for a boxy sedan from the mid-80s. In 2024, when there's an Explorer or Tahoe or even a Charger behind you, you kind of get this sixth sense. Maybe you start to slow down because you think it's a cop. At least I do that. The same thing applied to these LTDs back in the 80s. A lot of American buyers at this time were looking for a front-wheel drive economy car. The LTD LX did not fit those criteria at all, being rear-wheel drive with a V8. On top of this, the all-new Taurus was being designed and would be released to the public in 1986. It's crazy to think about how for a brief period of time, these were sold next to each other at dealerships. I really like that Ford offered these LXs to the public even though they weren't popular. It showed some courage and effort, which I can totally get behind. From a modern point of view, I think these are absolutely awesome. Being on this platform, they have so much potential on the drag strip or wherever. When I was doing research for this video, I read tons of comments from owners and Fox Body fanboys. I hope you guys add any details that I missed so the viewers can get even more information on these. I feel like I did a pretty good job, but when it comes to cars, there's a lot to learn. That is going to wrap it up for this week's video. I do sure hope you enjoyed it. Every now and again, I will dedicate an entire video to a car or truck. The reason behind this is just because, I'll find something that's interesting or bizarre and cool, whatever, and I'll want to make an entire video for it. But anyway, that is this week's video. I do sure hope I can have a video next week. I know I have a pattern of uploading maybe once or twice and then skipping a week or so. I'll try to get better with that. Enjoy the rest